Welcome to this installment of Data Simplified. I am Dr. Mechi Kengwa, and I am the founder and chief data strategist of Data Products. Today, we have the pleasure of talking to Mark Schwartz about the role of bureaucracy in digital transformation. Mark joined AWS as an enterprise strategist and evangelist, where he works with enterprise technology executives to share experiences and strategies for how the cloud can help them increase speed and agility while devoting more of their resources to their customers. He has extensive experience as an IT leader in the government, private sector, and nonprofit world, and with organizations ranging from startups to large in size. Prior to joining AWS, he was the CIO of US Citizens and Immigration Services in the Department of Homeland Security. Mark is the author of The Art of Business Value, A Seat at the Table, IT Leadership in the Age of Agility, War, Peace, and IT, and The Delicate Art of Bureaucracy. Welcome, Mark. It's a pleasure to have you in this session today.
Thanks, my pleasure.
Yes, so today we're going to talk about bureaucracy in digital transformations. So first of all, let me start off with congratulating you on your recent book that was published this past October, I think, The Delicate Art of Bureaucracy, Digital Transformation with the Monkey, the Razor, and the Sumo Wrestler. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your intended reader who should read this book and why?
Sure. Anybody who doesn't like bureaucracy. um, yeah, I work with a lot of large traditional companies to try to help them accomplish their own digital transformations, and I come across a lot of impediments that are getting in their way. They tell me what's troubling them and what's hard. And a lot of the time I realize it's connected with this thing called bureaucracy. And I happen to have learned a lot about bureaucracy because I worked in a federal government agency, which had a little bit of bureaucracy. And I thought maybe I could help a little bit by sort of teasing apart what bureaucracy is and when it gets in the way and why it gets in the way and how you might deal with it when you find it in your way. So the book is intended for leaders of organizations that are trying to conduct change of some sort of big change, and they find themselves confronted with bureaucracy.
Right. That's fantastic. So basically, that I imagine covers 99.9% of the population who loves to deal with bureaucracy, right? It's something that is a medicine that you have to take basically as part of working. It's not something that anyone really actively sticks out.
Yeah,
So,
I started to tell stories about my time in the government when I was speaking at private industry events. And after I talked, people would come up to me and say, "Oh, that's just like my company. We have the same thing."
right.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Mhm. So interestingly, you give a really a short historical overview of bureaucracy, right? From Christian angelology with its nine choirs of angels, the rabbinic law and the 613 commandments of the Torah, rules, regulation, and governing structures that have existed since the earliest days of civilization. Now, this slow, meticulous structures of careful bureaucracy is something that you present as in direct conflict with the impulses and disposition of contemporary IT professionals. A world that is oriented towards efficiency, producing quick results. First of all, is this a fair characterization of one of the key issues that you're looking to address?
Yeah, I would agree with almost everything that you just said. Part of the point I tried to make is that bureaucracy is all around us all the time, and often we don't even notice it because it's not getting in our way. There's plenty of bureaucracy that just sort of functions okay. So that was my point about all those historical references to bureaucracy. Bureaucracies sometimes take on certain characteristics that get in our way, and I identified three of them. I think some bureaucracies are, number one, bloated rather than lean.
Right.
Some of them petrify instead of learning and adjusting. And some of them are coercive rather than empowering and enabling. And those three characteristics are not necessarily part of bureaucracy. They're add-ons that often come with it. And so the main point I'm trying to make is that it's not bureaucracy itself that's in the way. It's those three things. And if we can solve those three things, and I give a lot of ideas on how you might want to do that, then you can proceed with large scale change.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, for the benefits of the viewers who haven't had the chance to read your book yet, you help leaders who work through all this emotional baggage, weighing down the term bureaucracy, like you just aptly explained, and eventually help them learn to wield these structures and systems more effectively. What are the top ways that bureaucracy used ineffectively can hamper digital transformation, do you think?
Well, bureaucracy, first of all, we need it in a lot of cases. If you're a large company and you have an IT organization, you're going to find that you need bureaucracy, for example, to comply with compliance frameworks, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, whatever applies to your company. It's going to require that you have controls in place and that you have responsibility up a chain of responsibility with people signing off on things. It's really the definition of bureaucracy in some ways. So you're going to have it. But I think there are other subtle places where bureaucracy is really part of your life. One of the examples I give in the book is marketing. When you think about branding, for a brand to have power, it has to be very consistently applied. And a good brand that has certain logos associated with it, and certain fonts and certain colors and all kinds of things like that. And you can't just allow somebody in the company to go and use a different font or a different color.
Right.
So there are rules about how you use the brand. There are rules about how you express it. There are approval processes if you want to mix your logo with somebody else's logo or whatever it is. That's bureaucracy too.
Mhm.
And it has a lot of value if you can keep your brand consistent. So bureaucracy has positive functions to play. It's just when it takes on those three evil characteristics, as I put it, that it's getting in your way.
Well said. Let's delve into the four divisions of your playbook that you laid out: the way of the monkey, the way of the razor, the way of the sumo wrestler, and finally the way of the bureaucrat. First, I'd love to hear more about how you come up with this for the first three metaphorical categorizations.
I don't know, it must have come to me in a dream or something. Um, I thought back on how I dealt with bureaucracy in my position in the government. And I realized that, I could make a list of the things that seemed to work pretty well for me. And then I realized they sort of broke into a few categories. There were things that held them together. And I tried to find a name for each of those categories. And I realized it was sort of three personalities. And I decided one of them was like the personality of a mischievous monkey. Another one was the razor, and then the sumo wrestler. So the monkey, the plays that I associate with the monkey have to do with provoking, and provoking and observing is the way some people put it. So the monkey tries doing something that the bureaucracy might not be okay with, but sometimes it is, as the monkey, you learn whether doing those things is going to provoke a problem or it's going to be acceptable. And if it provokes a problem, then you know what you have to fight. So that's kind of the way of the monkey, if I had to summarize it. The way of the razor is there I'm sort of referring to the principle of Occam's razor. Occam, a medieval philosopher, who's sort of credited with the idea that simpler explanations are better than more complicated explanations. That's not really exactly what he said, but that's usually what he's given credit for. And so I said, a lot of what I did had to do with looking at bureaucracy and trying to find a simpler way to accomplish exactly the same thing. So if you need bureaucracy for its controls, maybe you can get those same controls, but do it in a way that's leaner and less bloated, less wasteful. So that's the way of the razor, trim away the fat. And then the sumo wrestler. I lived in Japan for a year, and if you live in Japan as a foreigner, you come to love sumo. Everybody does. It's this amazing sport, and the thing about sumo is, you have two massive people who sort of crash into each other, and you can win your match either by pushing your opponent out of the ring or by making them fall and touch the ground with something other than their feet.
Right.
So what happens in a match is that these two big people crash into each other. But if you push hard, you might be able to push your opponent out of the ring. But if they loosen up a little bit, you might just go flying yourself. And that's the thing about sumo. So it's this very delicate balancing, where you're going to sort of push and pull and read your opponent, and you can't overcommit. So I realized that some of my little moves in dealing with the bureaucracy had to do with using the bureaucracy's strength against itself, which is essentially what's happening in that sumo match. So one of the things we did was we actually created more bureaucracy. It just was good bureaucracy, and that worked because the government was very comfortable with that. So anyway, that's the high level. That's what the sumo wrestler is doing.
That makes it's actually cool that you have this characterization that highlights sort of three different sets of behaviors, because it's then easier for someone reading the book to identify with which one and basically link them up, as opposed to trying to recall the set of characteristics that fall into each of the different groups independently.
Yeah, I'm trying to associate it in people's minds with those three things, which are easy to remember and understand. And it might turn out that the techniques I list, maybe there are other ways to use the personality of the sumo wrestler or the monkey that I didn't think of. And everybody should be creative and see what works for them.
Right. One of the points in the way of the monkey from the book is to ban learned helplessness. Right? Could you elaborate a little bit on this? Like, in what ways is helplessness taught in society?
Yeah, I found that in a bureaucracy, one of the things that happens over time is that people just sort of give up on resisting it. They learn that there's nothing they can do that's going to change anything, and so they stop even trying. And I saw that a lot in my organization, where I would say we're going to do such and such because it's the best. It's the best practice for technology. It's the best way to proceed. And people around me would say, yes, you're right, it is the best way, but nobody's ever going to let us do that. And then, they would just sit there. We're not going to fight it. And I think that's one of the things that makes it so hard to fight a bureaucracy, is that everybody gives up because they've been so beaten down by it. They try 10 times to fight a battle. They don't win any of those 10 times. And after that, they're not going to do it again. So one of the things the monkey has to do is to provoke people into trying anyway. And there were some things I found useful for getting them to do that. One was I could take a lot of the risk on myself. I would say, okay, you tell me they won't let you do it. Don't worry about that. You just go ahead and do the right thing. I'll deal with the people who are going to get in your way. And that worked pretty well. But it's the learned helplessness that somehow you have to make it go away if you're a leader.
Right. And well, the power really, or the onus on that is on the leader.
I think so, yeah. People talk about servant leadership, about the idea that really the leader is there to remove impediments for the people who work for him or her. And I think that's the key, because you can't fight a bureaucracy by yourself if you're a leader. It's your people who are going to have to fight the bureaucracy. You have to have a scale. Everybody has to be engaged in doing what needs to be done. But you can't engage them unless you make it clear that you're bearing the risk. You're going to help them with anything that they run into because you have the power as a leader, or you have some power at least. So how can you expect to get that urgency and traction behind the transformation unless you're going to help your people and see it as your job to remove those impediments.
Got it. Right. Um, Another provocative point, not to lean towards all provocation, but another provocative point
I try.
is under the weight of the razor, right? You advise respecting diminishing returns. When can this be a benefit?
Yeah, the examples I gave, trying to remember exactly, but it's a principle I use all the time. Let's say, I don't know, in IT, it happens a lot that you need to write documentation for your systems. And there might be a lot of requirements, you need to document this, and this. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. And so I say, what if you just did 80%? Would you be getting 99% of the benefit of the documentation if you only wrote a certain 80% of it? And you can keep asking that question. Is there, there's obviously diminishing returns at some point when you do a lot of work. And if you're prioritizing, eventually you're getting less and less impact from each additional piece of effort. And sometimes what's making this so expensive and take so long is that you're trying to get to 100% when you have diminishing returns. So we would say in the government, we have to be fair to our contractors. So if one contractor leaves and another one replaces them, we got to make sure there's documentation in place so the new contractor can come up to speed really quickly. And that's an example where it's an endless job, right? You can just keep writing documentation to try to help that second contractor, and you could be writing forever. So what you really need to do is say, we're just going to try to get that second contractor 80% of the way there, or 60% of the way there, and help them the rest of the way using a different technique, not documenting stuff. And if you do that, it reduces that waste, the administrative waste that's often there in a bureaucracy, and contributes to, I said the razor is what makes things lean, and that's one of the ways you can make things a lot leaner.
I also hear agile in that explanation. So this is more akin to the 20-80 rule, right? Where 20% of the work and you get 80% of the benefits.
Yeah, for sure. And you usually don't need 100%. So in the example I just gave, the new contractor, they not only read that documentation, but they can also talk to you, and they can look at the code in the IT systems. They have other ways of coming up to speed. And so you don't really need 100% on the documentation. And it can make a really big difference for the amount of work. So it is a lot like the 80-20 rule.
Right. Your book is aimed largely at leaders and managers, right? But is there a message here for workers as well? What advice do you have for IT professionals who have natural aversions to bureaucracy?
Well, one of the messages is there are ways to deal with it. Like bureaucracy for some reason upsets us so much. It's a scary, almost metaphysical thing. There are novels written where the bureaucracy is sort of horror, Franz Kafka's novels, for example. It's not. It's just a way of organizing work. And so you shouldn't let it get to you, as it often does. And you actually can deal with it. There are tricks you can use or techniques. So that's one message. But the other message is it's almost an ethical principle to me that if you think something is wrong, if you're sure, that we're wasting a lot of money on this project because of bureaucracy, and you're sure of that, you can't have this learned helplessness and say, well, I'm just not going to do anything about it. At Amazon, we often talk about disagree and commit. That you have to disagree with something if you really disagree with it. You can't be passive aggressive and sit there and just say, oh, that's wrong, and let it go. And I think workers have to reevaluate their attitudes on that. I sincerely believe this is wrong. Well, I got to try to do something about it. I might fail, but I got to try.
what do you say? It's not to interrupt, but what do you say to someone in the Midwest? And I call Midwest because that's where I am, where our operandus is a method of operation is you do not ruffle feathers.
Yeah, I'd go even further. I'd say there are some other countries where some of the things I propose you can't really do. The monkey maybe doesn't work so well in Japan. I don't know, where you don't ruffle feathers. But I think so you have to do some interpretation of the points that I give there. But even in Japan or in the Midwest, there are ways to accomplish the same thing. You just might do it a little bit differently,
Right.
right? You can still disagree. It's just sometimes your disagreement has to sound like you're agreeing. There's a way that you can let people know that you disagree, even if you don't do it by saying, "Boy, you're dumb," like we New Yorkers would.
Yeah.
I'm from New York. People know it's affectionate if you tell them they're stupid.
Right. Right. But again, you're arguing that saying it's not enough or letting your disagreement be known is not enough, right? You need to push forward and actually find a solution. So it's more than just communicating your disagreement with whatever is being discussed.
Yeah, I admit that sometimes you don't succeed, when you fight something, but you have to try. And and I think when it comes to bureaucracy, there is a lot more scope for making change than you think. That's what I've found pretty consistently. Sometimes you need help, but you can try to get help. You round up other people who maybe have some organizational power who can support you, and you go ahead and try to change it. And if you can't, then at some point you say, okay, I tried my best. I'm going to have to commit to it, commit to the way the organization is set up. Or you have to approach it humbly enough to say, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this change is not right. I've got to keep my ears open. But the learned helplessness thing isn't really okay.
Yeah, that's I agree with that completely.
Right.
Point well made. Point well made.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to say you always succeed. Sometimes fighting a big bureaucracy is hard, as is, other fights, of course, similar principle. Really, in my government environment, the bureaucracy was pretty heavyweight. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I thought about sumo wrestlers. Like it's going to bury you and pin you down unless you figure out how to use its own strength against it. But really, it's a message of hope. There's really a lot you can do.
Right. So on that message of hope, that's it for Bureaucracy in Digital Transformations, folks. For more data science insights and future installments of Data Simplified, just subscribe to our YouTube channel, Data Products. You can also follow us on Facebook and on Twitter. Thank you and see you next time. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.